everyone, and welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach, and I'm author of the book, A Life to Die For, which you can find on Amazon. I hope you'll head over there and pick it up. And by the way, while you're at it, you can also see this book. I got my name on that one as well. It's called The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care, 25 Tools for Stress Relief. And guess what? My guest today is also a co-author on that book. So you'll find out more about her in just a moment. I'd like to remind everybody who's here on the live presentation that we are live and we would like to interact with you. So feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat area, and we will do our best to respond to them as they come up. We may not respond instantly, as you know, if we're in the middle of a conversation or something, but we'll certainly get to those comments and we will answer your questions to the best of our ability. So why don't we just get started? Now, who in this world has not at one time or another been hurt, slighted, wounded, or even traumatized by another person? And of those who have been victimized in one way or another, who hasn't necessarily maybe secretly wished for some revenge or for some justice or just to get even, and maybe even acted on that desire? Well, resentment is something that most people experience at one time or another in their lives, some to a greater extent than others. It turns out that we hold on to resentful thoughts of revenge. We tend to do more damage to ourselves than to anybody else. Resentment is, to paraphrase a wonderful reminder, a kind of figurative poison that we ingest in the vain hope that the other person will die. Kind of how we treat it. Well, for this episode of Life Mastery TV, I've invited a highly knowledgeable licensed psychotherapist who for more than a decade has been a parenting professional, working and studying in the fields of human behavior, psychology, and sexuality. Through her growing coaching practice, she guides people along their life journey, supporting them with life transitions, chronic stress, post-trauma, leadership, and relationship challenges, and a lot more besides that. And you're going to learn more about that today. So please join me in welcoming the brilliant Dr. Toni Warner to the show. Welcome, Toni. I'm glad you're able to be here today, and I'd love for us to be able to see you.
Here I am. Hello.
There you are. Welcome aboard, and thanks for coming on to Life Mastery TV. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, it's awesome to have you here. I know that you and I've crossed paths in a virtual way, and as I mentioned at the top of the show, you are a co-author with me on that book. Show your copy so we can all see it.
Yes, I agree. And we've crossed paths multiple times at this point. We've done multiple presentations together with the Wellness Universe. We've got the book, for sure. Panel. We did a panel the other week.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And so I'm glad you're able to be here with me and to discuss something that's related to my favorite topic, which is life mastery. And, I remember I was reading through your bio, and it said in there that one of the things you talk about is that you've navigated some mental health issues and challenges of your own and relationship challenges and that sort of thing. And I guess you know what it's like to wrestle with the relentless need to achieve while dealing with an overly active load of mind clutter. So do you want to share a little bit about that journey with us so we kind of get a sense of who you are and where you're coming from and maybe how you got onto this path?
Sure. So I think a good place to start is just to know that I am the daughter of multiple pastors. And so I was raised in the church. My mom is white, my dad is black, and I was an overweight tomboy. And so I quite literally fit in no box when I was growing up. I just didn't. There weren't mixed kids in my class. I was always the heaviest. I always looked the most different, wasn't black enough, wasn't white enough. And so growing up, I just didn't really fit in, but I wanted to. And that in and of itself really bred a lot of mental health challenges for me: anxiety, depression, bulimia, and so on and so forth over the course of my upbringing. And even as far as church was concerned, I always had a faith. I never questioned my faith. But I was the daughter of the pastors. So I knew that things weren't high and mighty, and I didn't hold my parents to the pedestal that others did. And in fact, had received some of the most hurtful criticism from church folk. And so I knew, I just knew this. It wasn't even a choice. It was a knowing that I would become this mom that would be loving and present, and this therapist that would help people who were hurting like I was, hurting on the inside, but no one knew about it on the outside because you had to keep it together. And so I learned pretty young that if I worked hard, then at least I could feel accepted in that respect. At least I could do well and be receiving some kind of reward or recognition or seen or something, right? Like something I would receive something and not feel so rejected. And it's funny, I came across my report card from one of my middle school years where there was a year where actually I tried to be dumb because I was told I was trying to act white because I was smart. I was always in gifted programs. And I was like, I don't want to be seen that way. That's right. And so I tried to act dumb, and my grades went down. And of course that didn't feel good. So now I'm like, I still don't feel like I fit in. And now my grades are going down, and that makes me feel worse. So then I had to work. You could see it on this report card. It was so weird. It's like A. And it's like all these horrible grades this one part of the semester. And it's like A. I'm like, and so trying to find my way and figure out who I was and where I fit in, really that's the first several decades of my life. But I always knew, it was never a question, that I would be a mom that would guide my children in this world to love themselves and love others. And I would be a therapist in this world that would help others that were in pain. And just naturally out of that bred the coaching. And so I do both. I do all of the above, actually. I have 3 kids. I'm a psychotherapist, and now I am a life coach, which I'm excited to pursue and continue to expand on. And it's just been quite the journey.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that you covered there that I think many people can relate to. Obviously, not very many of us, I mean, not a lot of us are biracial, so we don't have that challenge to deal with. But I think it's fair to say that virtually everyone struggles with this idea of fitting in. I mean, if it weren't the biracial thing, it would be something else, Yeah, and I can relate to the whole nerd kind of mentality, and then that label that was applied. I mean, turns out I'm a pretty smart guy, and it kind of pissed some people off because maybe they weren't born with that particular characteristic or quality. So in a way, they were jealous of my own smartness, but they wanted me to be less smart so they could feel smarter. This is a strange thing that we humans tend to do to each other in order to make each other fit into the molds that we have somehow created and that we believe exist across the board. And so I think it's awesome that you have taken the road to psychotherapy and coaching, because what that does is it helps you to learn some of the tools that I think are important for helping other people to realize, yeah, you're special and amazing just as you are, and when you tell someone that, they don't necessarily believe you. They have to kind of find it for themselves. Yep. But they still, I think deep down inside, down here, they know it's true. It's their ego mind. And this is something that I talk about a lot, is the ego mind. The ego mind is what really gets in the way. Our spiritual essence knows the truth of who we are, and it propels us to do things. But the ego mind keeps wanting to shut us down and criticize and judge and make all kinds of. So yeah, it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said something really important, and depending on whoever is listening, wherever you're at in your journey, it's going to hit you different, because I know it hits me different too, depending on where I'm at in my journey is, everyone can relate to that. It's this, everyone's felt like they don't fit in at some point. Now, this place in my journey that I'm in now, I 100% know agree and see that as fact, right? But when I was in the midst of my pain, it felt like I was alone and like no one else could possibly understand. And that connects with this resentment piece as well. Like you said, like they would be maybe mad at you, or they didn't like you because they perceived you as intelligent. And so maybe their perception was, it looks like it's so easy for him. He doesn't understand. This is hard for me. I'm alone in this. You couldn't possibly understand. And there is a sense of resentment that can come. I don't want you to have it easy when I'm over here sacrificing, having to work hard for this thing. Now, obviously, it goes deeper as we talk about how this affects us in our intimate relationships. But that's part of it. That's part of it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it goes further than that. I mean, as you say, I'm all alone. You can't possibly understand what's going on for me. And yet maybe on the other side, I'm thinking, hey, maybe I'm not really understanding what this person's doing. Maybe I can reach out and try and help. Well, then you get shit for helping somebody. Hey, what the hell do you think I am? You think I'm incapable of doing it? You know, you see, this is the ego mind, again, just constantly making judgments about everything that's going on. And so, yeah, resentment then can come up as a result of how people treat us. You know, and we therefore assume that person is out to get me, that person is out to hurt me, that person is trying to ruin my life. Whatever the story is that goes on in our head, it might be true, but it probably isn't. And yet we make up this story that, the world is out to get me, and I need to get even. I need to get justice. And so what do we have in our world today but a whole army of social justice warriors who are constantly trying to change things, when in fact, really the issue has to do with themselves internally and finding their own healing. And I think we've got a big challenge here. So part of our job, your job and my job, is to help people to see that they have the power to elevate themselves, to elevate their own consciousness, to stop listening to their ego mind, and to begin showing up as authentic, powerful, uncompromising human beings with as much power as anybody else. This is part of our job, as I see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you covered a lot there too. And I'm systemic in how I view things often. And so when you talked about kind of social advocates, so to speak, I do think there is a place for social advocacy, and I do think it's important. However, resentment can be bred at the micro level as well as at the macro level, right? Like you can breed resentment for people, but you can also breed resentment for systems. And the perception of how you're being treated really is a key piece. And all of our perceptions of things are different. We all perceive things in some either slightly or significantly different way based on our life experience, right? So today we're going to talk mostly about the micro level, but just know that this can apply to the macro level as well. And anytime we're talking about resentment, there is this internal component that does need to be addressed in order for the outside pieces, again, whether it's micro or macro, so whether it's a system or a person that you're wanting to influence, you have to tend to internal pieces that are coming up for you in order for you to show up as your best self in those other parts of your life. Whether it's social advocacy work or it's in your relationship with your partner, your sibling, family member, child.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm all in favor of justice, you know, as long as it's uniform and fair and not more justice for one group of people than for another. That's kind of how I look at it. But I don't want to go down that political path of justice. I want to talk more about, so I think you and I are on the same page, mostly regarding the whole notion of like resentment. Resentment is something that I feel. It's something that happens inside me. It's not something that happens out there. Therefore, I can't change it out there. So I have to look at what resentment is in relation to me. So let's start there. What exactly, how would you describe or define resentment so people understand what we're talking about?
Yeah, so I do think resentment can get a bit complicated when we kind of talk about how it shows up and how people experience it. But honestly, it's really characterized as a personal sense of feeling unfairly treated. Right? That's the simplest definition and the easiest way to put it is that's what it is.
Okay.
A deep personal sense of feeling that you've been unfairly treated or just not considered in some shape or form.
Sure. And so when that happens, what are the typical expressions of it from my perspective? If I were the one experiencing resentment, how do you say that I would likely show up?
Yeah. So there's a couple components to that. Emotionally, we can experience resentment as a conglomeration of emotional experiences. So resentment in and of itself is not a core emotion. So it's got these kind of various feelings attached to it that come along with it. And you can feel them like a pendulum swing sometimes or all at once. But likely there's a sense of lack of safety, of emotional safety or psychological safety. There's this lack of safety within the situation. Most people are not able to put their finger on that experience. But it's this fear, this reactionary experience, right? Also, there's often this experience of just feeling unworthy or betrayed in some way. Again, this is typically hard for someone to put their finger on, even though they're experiencing it, because it just feels like it's a conglomeration of things. What's typically the easiest for someone to put their finger on is the anger, the rage, or the sadness. Right?
You're talking more about a specific emotional component now. Yeah, and that's got its own flavor for each of us. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and physically, because resentment shows up as a stress reaction in our body, it puts us in a place of defense. It shows up as a physical stress reaction. And how that looks for each of us is a bit different, but typically if we're in stress, our body contracts, tenses, right? It might feel if you're needing to protect yourself, if that's how you're feeling, you might hover more and kind of tense up, or you might retract more and tense up, depending on what emotion you're in. Like that's the kind of tense feeling you'll feel in your body. Some people even feel like their body's heating up, right? And then mentally, it can be really sneaky. It can disguise itself as acting in the name of things that you've already said: rightness, justice, fairness, self-protection, defense, right? And it just can disguise itself as such. So it feels like you're like, yes, like I should be doing this. I should be feeling this way, right? And don't get me wrong, how you feel is how you feel. And I do not believe it's ever helpful to invalidate how you feel. But we do want to get curious about why we're feeling the way we're feeling, not stay stuck in it.
Right.
That's not healthy, right?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, let me share a little bit about my own story. I mean,
yeah, please.
I discovered when I was like probably 40 that I was a very angry and resentful person. And at the time, I couldn't tell you exactly why that was true. It took me several years of personal growth work, psychotherapy, men's group processing, all kinds of stuff before I finally was able to pinpoint the cause that triggered that whole sequence. And believe it or not, it happened when I was 3 years old. It started as a simple, almost innocent message that my mom delivered to me, not out of malice, but out of a way of controlling a rambunctious, rebellious 3-year-old kid. You know, she had me up on the change table. She was kind of holding onto my arm. She was shaking me. She was saying, "I'm your mother. You're supposed to do what I tell you," and blah, 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 blah. And I was kind of, yeah, so what, you know? And finally, she said the 8 words that changed everything. She said, "I know you better than you know yourself." Now, in fact, that was probably true back when I was 3 years old. However, what happened with that in that moment, as I think about it now in my adult mind and in my adult intellect, I think what happened is that kind of hit me. It landed on me in a very strong way, and it kind of bounced around in my head. And I found myself maybe thinking about that and saying, well, yeah, you are my mom, so you know me better than anyone else does. You take care of all my needs. You make sure I'm well loved. You take, you know, you do all these things. So I guess it's true. You love me, or you know me better than I know myself. So I adopted that as a true statement.
Mm.
But then very quickly after that, I started in my typical intellectual skill. Well, if mommy knows me better than I know myself, then daddy knows me better than I know myself. Then grandma knows me better. You see what was happening? So I was starting to expand this out to the belief that everybody knew me better than I knew myself. So consequently, I was giving up my own sovereignty. I was deferring to other people to tell me what I wanted and needed. But at the same time, I could see other people in the world who were able to express what they wanted and needed, but I couldn't do that. You see, I was starting to get angry and resentful as a result of that. Anyway, this resentment built up over many years until it finally exploded when I was 40 years old, and it had a very, very negative consequence. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but it could have been very dangerous. And it was that moment, that was the wake up moment for me. And what I'm hoping is that people will not allow whatever's going on in their lives to get to that stage. You know, if you're starting to feel stuff like that, acknowledge it, own it, do something about it, get a help, call Dr. Toni, or call me, or call somebody to help you deal with this, because it's just going to get worse. Remember, like I said, it's like that poison that you drink a cup of poison and you think that person's going to die because of this. You know, and that's obviously not going to happen. So, yeah, so resentment can be it can be very debilitating. For me personally, it was accompanied by lots of thoughts about the world and what kind of world this was in. It was accompanied by a lot of belief systems that had to do with, well, I can never do this, or I can't get what I want, or I'm not going to be able to succeed because, you know, and so forth. All of these made up stories, none of which were true. Not a single one of them were true. So, you know, this is something that can happen. And, you know, when I realized all this, I began to understand why I was so angry at my mother. Because she was the target of most of my anger. And once I understood that and I did all the work to heal it internally, then I was able to forgive her.
Mm.
And once I was able to forgive her, I was able to see her as a loving woman who was doing the best she could with the skills she had and the tools that she had available to try and make my life as good as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But she also gave me another gift that I was never able to really tell her about before she died. And that is, she helped me to learn how to claim my own sovereignty, to know the truth of who I am, and to release stuff like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a process, right? Sometimes, you know, when we talk about things like this, especially things that can have such a significant impact on our life, we want it to just tell me how to do it and I'll do it, right? Like, at least exactly, the folks that I work with, they're like, tell me how to do it, I'll do it.
I just want those 3 steps.
I'm like, I wish I had a light switch for you, right? But that's just not the reality. It takes decades, as you shared, David, to craft the snowball effect and the meaning and the story that comes up, right, in our lives and in our experiences. So it's going to take time to peel back those layers, to tend to some of the wounds that just haven't been tended to. And then some folks here like stuff from my childhood, like old wounds, like that's not relevant. Like I don't live there anymore. That's done. That's right. There. Right. And so then there's work there too that needs to be done as well. Is we don't live in a vacuum within where we're at in this moment of time, right? Like our past, it doesn't need to define us, of course, but it still affects us. It's still been part of our life experience. It still helps shape how we see the world, how we see ourselves. And so it's worth digging. I don't like the word digging. It's worth getting clear on how it's impacting you.
Because another word, I call it bucketing.
I'm not
this great big pool, and you just take out one bucket at a time. That's really, and then you do what you can with that bucket. Well, here's what's interesting. It's kind of like draining the swamp, so to speak. Each bucket may seem like it's not having an impact, but it is. And that's the thing. So just it's like climbing a mountain. You know, you've got this huge mountain in front of you. It seems like you're never going to get to the top. Well, you're certainly not going to get to the top until you take that first step. And then once you've taken the first step, you can say, oh, and it's, oh, look at all this mountain to go 2, 3, 10, 20, 100 steps. After a while, guess what? You can stop for a moment and you can turn around and say, wow, look how far I've come.
Mm-hmm.
How many people pause and reflect and give themselves credit for how much work they've already done? I think it's a beautiful metaphor, and I think it's a powerful process for all of us. Take ownership of your gifts. Take ownership of the steps you've taken so far. Bless yourself, honor yourself, give yourself a great, big, beautiful, loving hug, and say, great, now I'm ready for the next 100 steps.
Well, we live in an outcomes-based society, right? And so we've been conditioned to really focus on you're only successful, you're only being productive, you're only good or right or whatever if you're on the other side of the mountain, if you've achieved the goal, if you've done X, Y, or Z, right? And that's the challenge, is that's not really why we're here. But I think in some ways, you and I, David, you and I get that, but how this connects to resentment, I think might be hard for some people to understand, right? Like that this is a process and we just peel back a little bit at a time. And if something from your past is not showing up in your present, affecting you right now, you don't need to go back and dig it up. Let's start with what the challenges are. Let's just start there. You just need one starting point. Start there. Other stuff's going to come up as we start with that one, right? Like, we don't need to dig it all up, right? Just start there. And I want to offer a super simple example that I think helps maybe I outline it a little bit more of, say you are someone who always does the housework. Okay. Simple example. And the only thing that your partner needs to do is just take out the trash. So you do the housework all the time and your partner continues to forget to take out the trash. And you look at that trash and you just want to throw it over their head after the 50th time of you saying, take out the trash. I'm doing everything else. Take out the trash, right? And so you're feeling resentful because you're like, I'm doing all the things. I ask you to do one thing. Why aren't you doing this darn thing? It's so simple, right? And because of that resentment, because of how frustrating that is for you, you can begin to believe that if your partner would just take out the darn trash, you would feel better. Take out the trash and then everything's going to be fine. And that goes back to what you were saying, David, right? Like, we want to believe that it's outside of us. We want to believe that if this thing outside of us would just be fixed, would just be better, then we would feel better. But the truth quite often is that even if your partner started to take out the trash, something else would then hook into that resentment, because the pain runs deeper than just your partner not taking out the trash.
Yep, absolutely.
Right. And this is what builds up. People are like, no, it's just so simple. Take out the trash. Right? Like, no, if you are having this strong of a reaction to it, right, and your partner's still not taking it out, there's something more. There's something more. And then your partner takes it out and you're still having a reaction to something else. There's something more. And so maybe, hypothetical, maybe beneath that hurt, which it is, it's hurt and it's pain, maybe beneath it, from growing up feeling like your voice doesn't matter, when you were expected to do what you were told, not talk back, not voice your dreams or your opinions, shut down your feelings. Anytime you feel sad or mad, get that out of here. We don't have time for that. Push them down. So you learned that. You took it in and that worked for you. That helped you focus in school to get things done. And when you get stuff done around the house, it helps you do that. It helped you please people, perhaps. Maybe that's what it was for you. Like, it helped you please people. And so you learned you can please people, you can move through, you can achieve things, as long as you just don't have needs of your own and shut down your feelings, right? So you'd gotten really good at pushing that stuff down. And so now thoughts creep in like, I shouldn't always have to be the one to take care of everything, or no one ever helps me out, or no one ever appreciates what I do. But in fact, you've set that precedence and you didn't even realize it, because you learned and you took in and you believed from a young age, whatever your experience was or experiences, usually it's multiple experiences, but right, you believed that like, you should be the one that does it all. And now because you see someone else doesn't have to do it, like, that's not fair. I just sacrificed all of this stuff. I'm working so hard and doing all of these things. It's not fair that you don't have to. But it's not about the trash. It's about the boundaries that you deserve to have in your life, to have healthy relationships with yourself and with others. They've been missing. It's about learning how to feel your feelings and share them in an open and safe way. That's not been happening. And so in a sense, there's this internal resentment towards yourself, sometimes betrayal towards yourself. I've betrayed my own boundaries. I haven't been listening to my own feelings. No wonder no one else is doing that. And it's not a blame game, though, but it's not a blame game. It's not saying it's your fault or someone else's fault. This is just, if we want it to change, then we have to be aware of what's contributed to it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Totally makes sense. I totally agree with everything you said. It's, and I'm sure anybody who's watching this or watching the recording or who's on the live call right now. And by the way, folks, we're happy to hear your comments or questions if you have them. So please feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah, I think that you hit some very, very interesting points in that conversation. And one of the things that I think happens, just to use this example of, you agreed to take out the trash. Now, when you make an agreement, there's a kind of an unsigned contract between us. And when you violate the contract, you are out of integrity with respect to our agreement and with respect to yourself. And I happen to value integrity. So consequently, when I see other people out of integrity, I tend to lose respect for them. Now, if I don't say something about that, if I'm just very quiet about it and I say, okay, that person's just being out of integrity, and I just live with it, what happens is I kind of create this, as you alluded to in your conversation, I create a teaching for you. I tell you with my silent treatment, by not mentioning anything, that it's perfectly okay for you to treat me that way. This is how I expect to be treated. I am not worthy to be treated any better than that. That's the message I'm conveying to my other person when I don't speak up. And so at the same time, I'm telling myself, man, if I speak up, I'm going to look like such a baby. I'm going to look like such a whiner. This person is going to dislike me even more. But how do I handle this? And this is something that I've seen happen over and over and over in relationships, where people withhold a little minor inconvenience that comes up. And what they're kind of doing when they're withholding that is they're putting a little brick on the floor between them. It's a little invisible brick. And then tomorrow you do something else that also irritates me. It's also really, really minor, and I ignore it. I put another second brick. And before you know it, I have built a whole wall between us. That is the nature of withholds. Now just imagine how simple it would be to just simply say to the person, look, I have a withhold, and I share it with you. And then you simply say, when the person agrees to hear it, say, it's my understanding that you have agreed to take out the trash. And when I see the trash left behind, I make up this story. Remember, I'm taking responsibility here. I make up this story that you don't care about our agreement. I know it's just my story. It's not about you at all. This is about me. But I just want you to know what happened. When that story gets going, then I make up all kinds of other stories that are related to it. And that creates distance between us. I want to be close to you because you and I are, we're husband, wife, whatever our relationship, because I love you. I want to be close. And I don't want a tiny little thing like this trash thing to get between us. So can I get your commitment to do it on a regular basis so I know when it's going to happen, and that way I will feel more relaxed and stuff. And that could be the end of it right then and there. The other person will say, wow, I didn't even know you felt about that way. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Or there could be other things that happen, but if you start with that simple little sharing of a withhold, something that's bothering you, start there before it magnifies and grows out of proportion, then you can do a lot to keep the relationship alive and help it to grow and flourish.
Right, because it will grow. You're right. I agree. It will grow. It will turn into a wall, creates a vast bridge, a vast valley, a vast mountain between you and the other person that you want to be close to. But there's also this component too that I think can complicate things for folks who may be listening is But I've maybe it's something like I've tried that. I've tried to speak up, but they won't listen or they won't hear me. Right. And there's this sense of not feeling emotionally safe to speak up. And when that's the case, I would say, let's ask, is that a pattern for you? Is that familiar for you? Do you often feel like it's not emotionally safe for you to speak up? Is it just this only? Is this the only thing? Or are there other things happening in your life where you're not feeling emotionally safe to speak up?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? Because there can be trauma underneath that hasn't been tended to, that needs to be processed. I just see it all the time. I see it all the time. And you deserve to lead and live a happy, healthy life.
Absolutely.
And if you're finding yourself in relationships where you are chronically unsafe to express yourself, this is where outside support can be really helpful. Right? Because it is difficult to break those relational patterns when it feels so unsafe to step outside and say, this is a boundary. This is how I feel. And you deserve to feel safe. And I just want to say that because I know that, there could be, I see it all the time. So I know there could be people listening who are like, I can't, it just doesn't feel safe for me. And there are very real instances where it's not safe. And there are also real instances where it is safe, but it doesn't feel safe because, again, of unprocessed experiences that have happened where it didn't feel emotionally safe for you before. And so now that's how your body's reacting.
Yeah,
right?
no, that's very, very important what you said. And I think that part of the work that you and I both do is we help people to track back something that is happening in the present moment. It's manifesting in one way, but it may be coming up, as you say, because of this feeling of impending doom. If I speak up, something bad's going to happen. And it could be you believe that because way back when you were a kid, you did something or said something and mom or dad just hauled off and whacked you across the side of the head, or worse.
Yeah.
And you learned in that moment that speaking up was dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Consequently, you may find yourself holding back when you want to speak up because you're that fear of being hit and damaged and harmed again is so strong in you. You may not even recognize it today as being that kind of a fear, but it could be something like that is so strong in you that you're just clenching up. You can feel your body doing this. You're clenching up and you're not even able to open the mouth and get the words out. So as you said, I mean, we don't want to dig up the entire past, but it's important to take that thread and trace it back and find out when that whole thing started. Because if we can find that, then we can heal that thing that happened, and we can help you progress it forward now and become more proactive and more self-assertive in a way that doesn't create danger for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so important, so important. And that connects to even just with what you were sharing in the beginning about social advocacy, right? Is that's one of the benefits of the social advocacy work, is that there are groups of people who have spoken up and they don't feel safe because they have been killed or family members have been killed or whatever, all of those painful things, trauma, right? And so that is a time to connect with someone or something that does feel safe to help you through that. You don't have to deal with all of this alone, even though internal pieces must be tended to move forward. Right? And that's hard. That can be hard. It's a hard pill for me to swallow. I was one of those people who's super uber duper independent, don't rely on anyone because that means something about me, blah, 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 blah. And that burnt me out twice. I mean, I have the experience, not just the professional personal. I have that experience as well, right? It doesn't take you to a place of health and happiness. It takes you to a place of burnout and resentment.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. Yeah, isn't that funny how we are taught to be self-reliant, independent, solve our own problems. People who ask for help are weaklings. This is the sort of mindset that we're all bombarded with all the time. And the truth of the matter is, yes, we can be independent and we can be sovereign individuals And at the same time, we can interact with people and get them to help us on certain aspects of our journey.
Yes, it's so important. It really is, because there is this piece that is essential, which is what you've talked about, David, is we do need to own, claim our own accountability, right? Who we are, how we want to show up, and hold ourselves responsible for showing up in that way. And then also, we are not, when we moved from whenever that was, from a we to an I in our society, that hurt us, that over-reliance, right? That over-reliance on ourselves, because we do also need one another. We're a social species. We are a social species. And so while we are connected inwardly to whatever higher power you believe in, we are also connected outwardly to one another. And so it's important to have a balance of the two. We want to maintain a healthy relationship within and outside, right? But you can't really have the healthiest of relationships outside of you without the foundational inside of you healthier relationship, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I like that. And so you're talking about, I like to call it interdependence. I mean, we are independent and we are dependent at the same time. And we can be mutually dependent or socially dependent with other folks that are part of our social circles. And there's no shame in that. In fact, we should take pride in that, I think. Pride, shame, whatever. Just be cognizant of the fact that when you are in relationship to someone else, you can still be a totally sovereign being.
Yes.
You don't have to give yourself up in the process of being in relationship with someone. And so you don't need to feel that resentment that can come up as a result.
Yes.
So we talk. I'm sorry, you were going to say something else?
I was just saying that's so true. And also, if you are feeling that way, know that you're not alone, and it is possible to move through it. You don't have to stay stuck in it. You don't have to stay there. There's not something wrong with you. You're not broken. Your relationship doesn't mean it's the end of your relationship unless you want it to be. But there is hope, right? There is hope. There's ability to move forward. And this is a common experience, which is why we're talking about it today. So that those who are experiencing it, which there are many, know that this is some of the pieces to tend to in order to move through it.
Right. Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about, actually we've talked for almost 45 minutes here about the nature of resentment, the kind of impact it can have on ourselves and on our relationships. And we've also talked a little bit about how we can break the cycle of of resentment. Now, what I'd like to do, I think that one of the most important aspects of personal growth, at least this has been true in my life, is being able to let go of resentment, release it. So let's talk a little bit about that. What sorts of tools do you recommend people get involved with in order to simply let go of resentment?
My experience with resentment is typically part of that is I'm feeling out of control. It feels like there's nothing within it that I can control. There's nothing I can do about it. This is all someone else's or something else's fault or to blame, and therefore I am powerless within it. And so part of moving through the resentment so that you can release it is acknowledging that there is power that you have within the situation and accepting that which you do not have control over. And usually people do the opposite. Like, I have no power and it's all your fault, right? And so you need to change all of these things. And so instead what we want to do is like, yes, we want to put down boundaries, but we're the ones that are responsible for putting down our boundaries. How they react is how they react. Then we get to put down the boundary based on how they react about what works for us. This is still my boundary, right? And so that is always something that you have control over. Again, unless you find yourself in an unsafe situation and you need to reach out to someone, a boundary is yours to put down. It is not a luxury. Boundaries are not luxuries. They are necessities. It is part of living as a healthy, responsible, happy human being. We need boundaries. And so putting down the boundary of this is a need that I have, this is a negotiable, this is a non-negotiable. And that's not something that you're necessarily going to need to figure out with that person. You need to talk to yourself about that. What is it that I'm perceiving is really unfair about this? What is the boundary that's been breached? And how can I put that boundary up in a more clear and consistent way? So that's what's within our control. But if we're focusing on all the things that we can't control, like how they're going to respond, or if they're going to understand, or whether or not they're going to agree, that feels so frustrating because there's literally nothing we can do to control that.
Yeah.
It just feels the resentment more.
Yeah, that's great. So setting boundaries is a powerful tool in and of itself. And I think that if we go into a relationship with an elevated level of consciousness, with the understanding that we both have boundaries, what we can do, and something I recommend people do, is we could create an actual written agreement of all the things that we together we agree to. Now, this doesn't mean that it's written in stone. It could be that we discover partway through our relationship, we made this agreement a while ago and it's just not working for me. I'd like to renegotiate it. Well, any agreement can be renegotiated. And I often encourage people in any relationship, write this stuff down. It's not good enough to just talk about it, because you and I may have a conversation today where I say, this is my boundary, and you understand this is my boundary. And then next week, we have another conversation, and one of us says, I said this is my boundary, and you'll say, no, you said your boundary was here. If we don't have the thing written down, then we don't know for sure who is right and who is wrong, and then we get into a completely different argument. So let's eliminate that altogether by having it written down. I tell people, any agreement that's not written down isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
Yeah.
Or an oral agreement isn't worth the paper it's printed on. So the idea is, take the time in a relationship to agree to the terms of the relationship and write it down. You can simplify all kinds of things that way and almost eliminate resentment overnight just by doing that. Of course, if one or both of you refuses to honor the agreements that you've written down, then you have a different problem. But at least you have something that you can refer to.
Yeah, I think, there are so many different ways to go about putting down boundaries. A lot of the folks that find their way to me are not in a place where the other party would be able to write things down with them. But regardless, writing down is helpful just for you. Just for you, right? You don't have to share it with anyone. You don't have to hold it up to anyone. Just for you. Writing down and allowing yourself to process your emotions while you do that. I mean, research supports it. That's helpful, right? So absolutely, it doesn't even matter if the other person's not in on it, the other person's not in on it. They're your boundaries. You're the one that gets to say if it's a negotiable, if it's a non-negotiable. They are an autonomous person as well. And so when you lay down your boundary, how they respond is on them. How they respond is on them, right? But there will be a learning curve, because anytime, and my clients hear me say this all the time, anytime one part of a system changes, it impacts the rest of the system, even if the rest of the system doesn't consent, which means the rest of the system may or may not like these new boundaries. They might need time to adjust to these new boundaries. They're going to be affected by the new boundaries if they haven't been clearly and consistently set before. That's a good thing. And you get to feel out, is the other person someone that is able to respect these boundaries that I'm setting down? We have to have some compassion with ourselves and compassion with their learning curve, because they're learning what our new boundaries are.
Right.
And that's why the consistency matters so much as well, right? Because if the boundary does change day to day, then it's confusing for you, it's confusing for them. And so that the boundary is really important. As cliche as it may sound, it is. It's just so important.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And while we're on the topic of boundaries, I think boundaries are interesting constructs. They can change. They can change anytime, really. Some boundaries are pretty rigid and will stay that way for a very long time, but some boundaries are a little more flexible. So be aware of the difference in the kinds of boundaries that you have. You may have very, very, very solid, rigid boundaries around your sexuality, for example. But you may be more flexible in your boundaries with the kinds of people you want to talk to. You see, this is what I'm talking about. So the flexibility level is going to change depending on the context of the boundary. So, be willing to be flexible in that area, and also be willing to recognize that you yourself may change. Even boundaries that up till now have been very rigid, you may decide, that's just not serving me anymore. It served me for all this time because I needed that protection because of such and such. But now I don't need that much restriction anymore. I'm going to expand my boundaries. Okay. So you've heard the story of the comfort zone. Well, the comfort zone really is just a boundary that we create. It's called our comfort boundary. And the comfort boundary can become like a comfort coffin if we're not careful. So you have to be prepared to expand the boundaries in order to grow. And that's really important for all of us to remember. And that means you have to be willing to allow your partner or partners, depending on what kind of relationship you have, to allow them to expand their boundaries too.
Very true. Very true. And I think, it does take some effort to put down new boundaries, to identify what boundaries are negotiable and non-negotiable, and to stick with that process because it's a new habit. And so one of the things that can be helpful is to get clear on what staying in this resentment is costing you. To help give you some motivation of, well, if it's costing me X, Y, and Z, and I don't really care about X, Y, and Z, maybe the effort I want to put in my boundaries isn't worth it, or maybe this relationship isn't that significant to me, or whatever the case is. But getting clear on what the resentment is costing you and what it's causing you in your life can help be a catalyst for whoa, this is a reason why I want to put in the effort to identify my boundaries and be more clear and consistent about them.
Great, yeah.
Right? And then after that, after the boundaries, if there can be, again, there's fears that come up of, well, if I put this boundary down, what's going to happen? Will I be rejected? Will they judge me? Right. And so get clear on what you're worried is going to happen.
Right. There's one other thing I want to mention about boundaries before we change the subject. And that is sometimes, boundaries are invisible. We don't necessarily see them. So therefore, it's possible for us to cross a boundary and not know that we've done so. The thing is, when someone speaks up and says, hey, whoa, wait a minute, you're going a little too far there, try not to take that personally. Try to remember that this is just the other person, maybe a delayed reaction in expressing a boundary, but giving you the opportunity to say, oh, sorry about that. I wasn't trying to violate your boundary. Whatever you want to say, just step back. And then maybe ask, okay, I'm sorry, could you please help me understand what your boundary is there so that I don't do that again? This is called mutual respect, friends. So, I have definitely violated people's boundaries in my time. I'm sure you have too. We all do it. But if we're doing it deliberately, that's one problem. But if we're just doing it as just part of our day-to-day thing, maybe I want to reach in and get a hug and you're not ready for a hug. Whoa, okay, I've just violated a boundary. But tomorrow, if I do the same thing, you might be quite open to the hug. You see what I'm saying? So we have to be flexible. We have to be open. We have to be understanding that we are completely transitional human beings. We're constantly changing. Our mood's constantly changing. Let's love each other.
Well, and what you're talking about, what comes to mind for me when you're talking is communication. And a boundary is just one form of how we communicate, right? And so expressing our feelings is another form of how we communicate. And so what we're talking about here is shifting our way of communicating, is opening it up, is finding a way for it to become more effective so that it can be received as well as so we can receive, right, communication in an open, safe, and more effective, clear way. And that communication is vital. Without communication, we're all kind of just feeling our way around in the dark type of thing, right? And we're bound to be over things. So we need that communication. And it's not easy. Especially if we weren't modeled or raised or have had personal experiences with healthy modes of communicating. It can feel foreign for us. have to have some patience with that process. It is essential.
Right. Patience is a good word. That's an outstanding word in this context. I think another word that I'd like to bring into the conversation is compassion.
Yes.
If we can develop an attitude of compassion towards ourselves primarily, but also towards the people with whom we are in relationship. If we have compassion, then we're less likely to find ourselves in a reactive state when something happens that doesn't feel good. We may be able to, from that place of compassion, express ourselves in a more loving manner that helps the other person grow and not feel that we're attacking them or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I would couple that together. Compassionate communication. Right?
Yep. And then on top of that, I mean, there's still the possibility that you may be feeling the resentment from something in the past.
Yep.
And maybe, as in my case, with my mother, who passed away before I had a chance to really, deal with this stuff and even talk to her about it. Forgiveness is one of the best tools that you've got available to you. My mother did some things that created a bunch of stuff to happen in my life. But as a result of that, I've learned a lot about myself. So I am now able to forgive whatever transgression I believe that she did, and I'm able to see her as another loving human being. If you can do that with whoever has maybe betrayed you or done something to hurt you or created some kind of harm,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that you're going to forget what happened. It doesn't mean that you necessarily condone the behavior that they were doing. It just means that you're releasing your energy about getting revenge or getting even or all that stuff. You're just releasing it so that you can live your own life free of that energy.
You can't have these two come hand in hand, right? Like you can't release resentment without forgiveness. And if you're not willing to forgive, you're going to feel resentful. Right. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They come hand in hand because part of the reason for the resentment is the holding on of this is unfair and this blame for it. Right. And so there's often forgiveness. Yes, that needs to happen between parties or from one party to another. But then there's also, this is often missed, a forgiveness that needs to happen from within, of you being willing to forgive yourself.
Absolutely. Yes.
And
in fact, that's the only forgiveness that really matters in the long run. Because if let's say you and I had some kind of an issue, my forgiving you is something that you don't even need to know about. I don't even have to tell you. It's something I do here. I am releasing this energy I have around you so that I can be free of all of the negative thoughts that come up in my mind. That's what forgiveness is. It's not, when someone says to me, "Will you forgive me?" I have to hesitate because I have to think about where this person's coming from. But clearly, it's an ego mind demand for me to do something so that their ego mind can be relieved. Mm-hmm. And I can't do that. Even if I say, "Yes, I forgive you," that's not going to change what's going on in your ego mind. It might briefly for this moment, but not in the long term. So this is really, really important. If I want to quiet my own ego mind, if I want to release all the stories and the judgments and the negative vibes and everything, I have to forgive. That's me. If I don't forgive, then what I'm doing is I'm basically hanging on to it. I'm creating the hooks, I think you call them. The hooks that just latch onto that thing, and then I can, imagine you getting all kinds of, mistreatment and stuff, getting even, oh man, that makes me feel so good. No, it doesn't really. It's just a lie.
And the important piece here is we are a social species, so I don't want to override those, especially that might be listening, that were truly really hurt by someone. Yes, them apologizing to you and you and or vice versa, if you really hurt someone and you are sincerely sorry and you want to know that they forgive you, that's a human desire that is 100% natural and normal. And that can help ease some of the pain, the frustration, but it can't heal what I'm saying, and I believe is what David was alluding to, is it can't heal the deeper wounds that's been created within. Right. So it can help to feel better. It's not that it's completely insignificant, because again, we're a social species and we do have this hard wiring to connect with one another, to feel safety and love and belonging with one another. But that external stuff, it can't heal the internal pain. Right. So both together can be a beautiful unfolding and healing, but you don't necessarily need that outside forgiveness in order to heal that inside wound.
Yeah, beautiful. Nicely said. Well, I don't know if you're noticing, but our time is just about up. This has been an amazing conversation. And there are so many topics that we've covered that I know we could spend hours on for each of those. Pretty exciting stuff. So thank you so much for being here. Toni, do you have anything more you'd like to say before I begin wrapping up? I know you have a gift you want to tell people about. Why don't you take a couple of minutes to do that?
Sure. So I know David has my hub. I have a resource hub link that you all can check out, my free resources and various digital coaching courses and ways to work with me one-to-one. But right now, because at the time of this recording, it is 2020 and it is the holiday season. So what I've done is I've unarchived my stress less during the holiday training, which is from last year. I've taken it out of my archives, and I'm offering it for free access for the next few weeks. So if you or someone you know is either feeling stress or anticipating stress for the holidays, feel free to grab that while it's free the next few weeks and use it to your benefit.
Sure. Can you just drop that link into the chat there, and I will read it out loud. I'll also put a link to this on my website. So it is called it's a bit.ly link, https://bit.ly stressless holiday gift. I will make sure that link shows up on my webpage on the post for this recording. Anything else you'd like to say before we close?
I'm so thankful that you've opened the door for this conversation. You're right. We've opened the cans of worms on a lot of conversations here. And so I'm grateful to have this space to help connect with those who need it. And so thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's been a pleasure having you here. And I'm sure that you're going to be on again sometime down the road. I'll certainly be bugging you to come back on. So anyway, thank you all for joining today and for watching today's program. And if you're watching the recording, thank you for doing that. And just want to remind you that you can catch recordings of this and every other episode that I do on my website at lifemasterytv.com, life-mastery-tv.com. I truly hope you enjoyed this presentation. I mean, I think all of these are awesome presentations about life mastery. But in a few hours, you're going to receive an email from the Learn It Live platform. And my request is that you take the time to respond to that, fill out a review for this site. And if you can bring yourself to give us a 4 or 5 star heartfelt, authentic review, I would love that. Thank you so much. And finally, I'd like to remind everybody to continue practicing the Life Mastery mantra, which goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So I'd like to thank you again for being here. Until we meet again, I am David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. Bye-bye for now.